Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. One more bonus to end the night with. I hope you guys enjoy this one. But before we get into it, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, channel membership are in the description below. The merch is displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost you a cent. Click that like button. It takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon. And folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things, they really do help this channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, folks, they definitely matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump into this midnight, well, before midnight bonus, shall we? Today's first encounter. I'm from Roswell, New Mexico, born and raised. I grew up dealing with the bullcrap alien nonsense my entire life. I'm a very logical thinker and have had many strange things happen to me in the past, but have always dealt with them, and this can be logically explained, mine says, since I can remember. But what I'm about to tell you right now is something I can't explain, and is also something I'm hesitant to even think about anymore. I was camping with my cousin Cam, 17 at the time, same age as I was, his little brother Nick, 13, and my aunt and uncle. We were near Cloudcroft, New Mexico, up in the mountains, Lincoln National Forest. My uncle had just bought a new camper, and we decided to go camping with it for the weekend. The weather was beautiful, and me and my cousins decided to bring a tent to sleep in instead of the camper so we could be in peace. We set up our tent about 60 yards away from the camper and the fire that was right outside of it. Towards the end of the first night, and after a long day of exploring, we all decided to lie down for the night. We weren't camping on an actual campsite. It was a spot my uncle had found some years back, and it was a perfect spot to set up camp. At about 3 a.m., the fire was completely out. My cousins and I were still awake. Nick, being the youngest, was trying to stay up to be cool with us, but ended up falling asleep. It was only Cam and myself awake now, and we were just shooting the shit, talking about girls from school, brilliant ideas for things that need to be invented, and eventually, slowly, starting to fall asleep as well. All of a sudden, we heard this blood-curdling scream from a distance, probably the same distance away the camper was, only in the opposite direction. Me and Cam both picked our heads up off of our pillow and said almost simultaneously, "What the heck was that?" It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a fox, it was big. The closest way I know how to describe it is a mixture between a banshee and a rabid peacock. Its voice was deep and echoed through the woods. It let out another blood-curdling shriek, and we both sat up on our blown-up mattress. Immediately after the screech, it started clicking, an odd, deep clicking sound coming from the back of its throat. It was loud enough to hear from a distance as well. We were scared, and neither of us had any idea of what it could be. We waited a second, both quiet as a mouse. It let out another scream, followed by a series of clicks, but it seemed closer now, maybe 10 yards closer. I looked at Cam, and he just looked just as shocked as I was feeling. I was trying to convince myself it was a bird of some sort or a mountain cat. Then I heard it walking. It was walking on 2 feet, and I could distinctly hear it. It even sounded big, taking huge strides, cracking branches and leaves under its feet as it walked. It sounded like it was coming close to us. It shrieked, clicked loudly again, and I could tell it was about halfway to us now. Suddenly another scream and click came from another direction, sounding just as close as the other creature. It sounded more aggressive, more angry and dominant. The first creature let off a series of clicks as well. Then it hit me. They're communicating. At this point, I'm terrified. So is my cousin. I had an axe under my blown-up mattress, but I was too afraid to go under and grab it. Then both the creatures started walking towards us, both on two legs, not screaming or clicking, but it sounded like they were trying to sneak up on our tent. They were getting closer and closer. The first one screamed loudly. I could tell it was roughly 15 yards away now, and so was the other one. After screaming, it started clicking again, and the other one clicked back at it. They were both walking closer and closer to the tent. I could hear them both stepping on limbs and leaves, but I could feel the ground thud with each step they took. I was panicking, frantically looking for my axe, while Cam was frantically trying to wake up his little brother. I couldn't find my axe anywhere. I realized I had left it near the campfire because we were using it to cut pieces of wood for the fire. Nick wasn't waking up, and they were getting closer and closer to the tent. Eventually, Cam and I froze. The second one had stopped about 10 feet away from the tent, but the first one was walking right up to the tent. As soon as it was right outside of our tent, I yelled as loud as I could out of pure fear, "Get the heck away from us and leave us alone!" It stopped. It was right outside. I could almost see it through the tent. It was huge, tall enough to lean over and look through the top of the tent if it wanted to. I could tell it was slim, humanoid, and heavy. I could feel its energy, and it was very negative. I felt the vibes of the universe, and they were telling me that whatever these things were, they weren't here just to say hi or steal our hot dogs. I was frozen. They were right outside, and the moon was covered by clouds, so moonlight was no longer shining anywhere. I couldn't even hear it breathing. It was silent. The second one clicked from behind us, still 10 feet away from the tent. The first one didn't move. It didn't make a single sound, and it was probably a foot away from the tent. My heart was beating so hard, I thought I was going to pass out. All of a sudden, it took 2 huge steps back, and the second one let out a scream so loud it hurt my ears. I immediately burst into tears. The second creature took off into the woods, pounding the ground underneath it, running on 2 legs. The first one apparently turned around and walked away back into the deep woods. I waited until I could completely heard the footsteps disappear, until I unzipped the tent and I threw little Nick over my shoulder and booked it towards the camper. We got inside and woke up our aunt and uncle. They had no idea what was going on and urged us to take our asses to bed. We slept in the camper the next 2 nights, and I didn't leave the campsite for the rest of the trip. I don't know what we encountered that night, but all I know is it was not an animal, and it was definitely not a human. It wasn't a bear or a 4-legged animal, and it scared me ever since. And its energy and screams still haunt me to this day. I give you my word, it's very real. I didn't find any proof to back up our story. However, one thing I did find really strange was the fact there was this huge rock at the end of a trail near our campsite that was absolutely covered in moss. The last day we were there, all of the moss on the rock was gone. I couldn't even recognize the rock until little Nick said something about it. The rock looked like it had been licked clean, not literally, but there wasn't any sign that moss had ever grown there in the first place. Just 2 days prior, the moss, when it was so thick, it felt like a couch cushion. Today's second encounter. In September of 1978, I lived with my father on a farm in the vicinity of Cheyenne, Wisconsin, which is very near the Menominee. Tonight's second encounter. In September of 1978, I lived with my father on a farm in the vicinity of Cheyenne, Wisconsin, which is near the Menominee Indian Reservation. There had been some buzz within the community of an unknown, large, hairy creature spotted by 2 deer hunters not far from our farm. I had heard stories of the Mano Bay Walk, or hairy giants, from stories told by the Mano Mini, but I just considered these tales to be legends. One evening, my father and I were coming home from the store and noticed what appeared to be 2 hairy creatures collecting squash from the garden. Each creature was at least 6 feet tall. It was dusk, but there was enough light to clearly see what they were doing. My father immediately cut the headlights and stopped the car as we just sat there and watched them pick and eat squash. After about 5 minutes, one of the creatures looked in our direction, and you could see its eyes glow red from the moonlight. We started to get scared and decided to make a dash for the house and call the police. Then suddenly a huge disc-shaped object appeared above us and slowly moved towards the east field, which is about 200 yards from us, and landed. I estimate the craft was about 40 feet in diameter. A large sliding door opened immediately, and a foggy green light glowed from within the craft. After a few seconds, the door closed, the craft slowly rose and shot off towards the north. Then we noticed the creatures were gone. A few days later, our neighbors from down the road came over for dinner. After we had finished eating, my father and Mr. Kane walked outside. After an hour or so, the neighbors left, and I started to clean up the kitchen. Later that evening, I was watching TV in the living room. My father walked in, turned the TV off, and sat down beside me. He told me that Mr. Kane and his sister witnessed one of the crafts on the same night that we had our encounter. As well, they witnessed several of the large, hairy creatures meandering through the nearby woods. Mr. Kane said that he knew something had been in the woods for several weeks, but never got a good look until the craft arrived. After that night, we never had another encounter, or did we hear of any more sightings by any people in the area. Today's third encounter. During the Christmas break in grad school in December of 1983, January of 1984, I was part of an Everest trek. We weren't going to the summit. Basically, we hiked from a small mountain town airstrip to the base camp at the Khumbu Glacier, where the real climbers took off from. It takes 10 days or so each way, with stops at monasteries along the way to adjust to the altitude. It was winter in Nepal, so most of the higher elevations were basically deserted. It was very cold and rocky up there, not very inviting, but starkly beautiful. The pack train had gone ahead to set camp up, and we each just hiked along at our own pace until we caught up at the end of the day. It was mid-afternoon, and as I rounded a sharp corner on a tiny narrow mountain ledge trail, I encountered a creature standing on the trail in front of an ice fall. It was clearly a primate of some sort, not really huge, between 3 to 4 feet, thick reddish hair like an orangutan with long arms. We just sort of looked at one another for about 10 seconds, and then it turned, climbed up an ice fall, maybe 25 feet, and vanished over the top. I didn't really feel threatened by it at all, but was very impressed by its speed and agility as it zoomed up the sheer ice face and was gone. It didn't seem to be startled or fleeing, it just moved on. It left me unplussed for a few minutes, but eventually I resumed hiking. When I told our Sherpa guide about it, he said it was a Yeti. Although his English was spotty, I got the impression there was a range of animals they considered to be a Yeti, not just the Johnny Quest type abominable snowman we talk about over here. So whatever else is up there, at least in the early 80s, there were smallish apes with excellent climbing skills. Tonight's fourth encounter. Within the past 2 or 3 years, I put pieces together from my childhood and concluded that a creature we all feared when we were kids, which we simply named the thing in the woods, was in fact a Bigfoot. There were just too many similarities and too many incidences and descriptions that I've heard from researchers and eyewitness accounts. I also looked up sighting reports and couldn't believe it when I saw that my area, western Pennsylvania, was a literal hotbed of activity. And when I spoke with others, having something like this lurking in your home area is terrifying, especially for kids. I remember these occurrences really didn't start happening until I was around 11 and my sister was 8. I remember when we first acknowledged our thing to a couple of our cousins when they were visiting for a day. We were sitting on my Graham's porch, who lived next door to us in a rural area. It was going to start getting dark in about an hour or so, and we started getting nervous. Our cousins kept asking why we were saying we had to go down home and be in before dark. When we finally told them that there was something that would come through the woods after dark and sounded like a freight train and broke tree branches, and I guess this was a vital clue, that it stunk awful. The best way to describe it then was like burning rubber. That's when my older cousin very calmly, by matter of fact, simply said, "Oh, well, it sounds like you have the thing in the woods here as well." We were shocked and asked what he meant. He recalled a story he had heard his dad and uncle talking about to their wives the previous hunting season. About 2 or 3 hours from our place this was. They always went deer hunting and, in the summer, went fishing. They had this little tin trailer they bought for the property that was about a couple of hours from their homes. They had it for only about 3 years. He said that this past hunting season, they cut their trip early, coming home after about 3 days. And they got home at some crazy hour in the morning because they had left in the middle of the night to come home. Their reason was the fouling. My cousin said his dad and uncle had been up at the camp and everything seemed normal at first. Though it seemed that there were few deer that season. Population changed, so they didn't think anything of it. The first night they were there, one of them thought they had heard some tree breaks while he was relieving himself, but thought nothing of it, since there are bear up there as well. Trees can break naturally and fall. That night they slept well, but when they left in the morning, they saw some odd pine cones and a couple of small rocks around their trailer. They couldn't figure out where it came from. The second night, they both heard pinging off the roof in the back of the trailer that sounded like really heavy big hail. It only happened randomly, but was enough to pique their interest. They looked outside, didn't see anything. They commented that it smelled something awful, like a skunky type of smell. It was my cousin's uncle that said it reminded him of burning tires on asphalt in the heat of a summer. That's why when we said that, it tipped my cousin off. Outside the next morning, they found more rocks behind the trailer. They climbed the ladder to the roof, and there were rocks on top of it as well. This definitely perplexed them, but they thought maybe it was some stupid kids messing with them. So they hunted that day, and the final night, they were talking and listening to see if something else would happen. Sure enough, they heard some large rocks hitting the back of the trailer. They went out with their guns and yelled whoever it was to stop, that they had the right to protect their property and they would do so. But the rocks kept coming. They went back out and smelled that awful odor again, very strong at that point. Then they heard what they described as a loud, powerful snap on the backside of the trailer. Now they're mad. They ran out again with their guns to confront the pranksters. They said that all they saw was a dent in the trailer, and as they panned their flashlight, they caught a glimpse of something large taking off through the tree line. They said it had dark fur, like a bear, but they both said they saw it running upright like a person. They knew no one in a fake suit could move that stealthily, or put that dent in the side wall of the trailer. They went inside, and one of them said, "We just saw a friggin' Bigfoot." They packed up their things and left within the hour, feeling very threatened. That was the last time they ever went to the property. So something terrified these lifelong hunter woodsmen into giving up something they loved. Hearing that story made me a believer. We were terrified all through growing up of the thing in the woods. Even to this day, after more recent encounters, I'm just as scared and won't go out there at night. And what truly solidified my belief that Bigfoot were around here was when I started to live with my ex, not living there now because he had passed unexpectedly. He insisted there were Bigfoot coming around the property. He had weird habits as well, which made me feel he was serious. He was a very well-respected Army vet and active-duty policeman. Alright folks, just a quick bonus to end the night with. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. Quick update on my dad. He's not getting better. They took out the feeding tube today. He has MRSA, C. diff, and another infection that we don't know how or when he contracted this or contacted it, whatever you want to call it. But probably at Glens Falls Hospital in New York. I don't know what's going on. I don't know. It's crazy. But anyway, just wanted to give you guys an update for everyone who's been saying a prayer for my pops. Guys, and thank you. It really does mean a lot. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, our pets, our family, and friends. These creatures are real. They're out there and they are dangerous. Share a little bit of information with the people that you love and care about, and it may just save their life someday. God bless you all.